Hello, everyone. Welcome to Norcliffe Studio. My name is Dennis Robinson Jr., Director of Programs and Partnerships here at Seattle Opera, and we're delighted to have you all here for this talk, and I'm sure many of you are attending the West Coast premiere of Lucidity right after this. So we're delighted to have you and our two guests, composer Laura Kaminsky and librettist David Cote. So welcome, everyone. Before we begin, let's take a moment to acknowledge that we at Seattle Opera and our audiences are working, performing, and experiencing opera on the land of the Coast Salish peoples. Since time immemorial, the Coast Salish peoples have been stewards of this land and its waterways and continue to shape the Puget Sound region today. This acknowledgement does not take the place of authentic relationships with indigenous communities, and it is our collective responsibility to honor, preserve, and know the land we are on. As a composer of opera, Laura Kaminsky frequently addresses social and political issues in her work with a distinct musical language that is full of fire as well as ice, contrasting dissonance and violence with tonal beauty and meditative reflection. That's from the American Record Guide. Her first opera, As One, is the most produced contemporary opera since its 2014 premiere, with 60-plus productions to date internationally. Awarded the Polish Gold Cross of Merit by the President of Poland for exemplary public service humanitarian work, Kaminsky has been recognized by the NEA, Opera America, Chamber Music America, and U.S. Artists International, among others. She is on the faculty of Purchase College Conservatory of Music and Boston Conservatory of Music, Berkeley, and is a mentor for Seattle Opera's Creation Lab. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you. Great to be here.
David Cote is a playwright, librettist, and critic. His television and theater coverage appears in the AV Club, Observer, Four Columns, and American Theater. David is the author of popular companion books about the Broadway hits Moulin Rouge, the musical, Spring Awakening, Jersey Boys, and Wicked. Welcome, David.
Thanks. Good to be here.
So we'll just get right into it since we have an opera to put on, right? Laura, it's so wonderful to have you back at Seattle Opera. As I said, you're a mentor in Creation Lab, and we also have we've produced As One here at Seattle Opera in 2016. So this is the second time presenting one of your works, but you have a much longer connection to Seattle. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Actually, I am so happy right now because I'm seeing some of my former students from when I was the head of the music department at Cornish College of the Arts, and it's been 20 years, so what a thrill to be back here. I remember you. It's a thrill to be here. This is a great city, and I have a long connection to it, and it was wonderful to come back for As One, although it was during the first Trump victory. Sorry, I don't know anybody's politics, but it was a kind of unsettling time, and this time at least we're post-election, but it's just great to be back in the city.
We're delighted to have you back.
Thank you.
I think that I saw the show last night, and I think that audiences will recognize a lot of truth in the story that you two are telling. You both have personal connections to the subject matter of this opera from many different angles. Could you both tell us a bit about what inspired you to undertake this project?
Sure. I mean, the actual sort of impetus for the story has a kind of, I don't want to say banal, but a kind of writerly origin. I ran into a violinist I know in the subway in New York who was going somewhere. I'm like, oh, where are you heading? She's like, oh, well, I'm going to play violin at somebody's house. It's part of a music and medicine program. We just go to their house, and they're elderly. They may have dementia, and I suddenly was like, whoa, okay, a musician, a person, an elderly person, and maybe their caregiver. That's a story I want to hear. and so it's just you as a writer, you sort of bookmark these premises, that you read a story in the newspaper, you bookmark that. And then and then after As One, saw it in New York like 10 years ago, I approached Laura at the Opera America conference, and I was like, hey, can we work together? And it was one of the many pitches that I floated by her. It took many years for this piece to come together because we had many meetings of story meetings, like what and I don't want to, I'm saying a lot at once, and your injunction at the beginning was like, make sure it's personal, don't just like float a story that you think is commercial or flashy, but make it personal,
Yeah, I mean, I didn't really know David, but a year after he saw the premiere of As One, I saw the premiere of a beautiful opera that he wrote called Scarlet Ibis, and I thought, oh, this guy is really poetic and beautiful. I'd love to work with him. So that was like 2 years until we began this conversation. And you actually pitched to me some sort of blockbuster novels and films, and we spent a year trying to get the rights for one of them. And it was like, yeah, but like I like intimate stories that are about human struggle and successes and vulnerabilities, and we needed to know each other. So we started talking about our lives, and out of that was this idea about an elderly person with music having some kind of epiphany or some transformation. And I have a very close friend who actually, we were just talking earlier today, Lucy Shelton, who plays the elderly character of Lily in the opera, is somebody that I met when I was just a student in New York in the many decades ago, heard her in concert, and we've been friends for 40 years. And when she was turning 75, she was like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. I said, give yourself a 75th birthday concert. And she did, and it was one of the most joyful, beautiful concerts, life-loving, beautiful programming, wonderful guest artists, filled with love and joy. And so I was like, and then she said, well, now what am I going to do? She said, why don't you write me something? And I thought, I'd write her a song. It's like, oh my God, I could write her an opera about an older person in the early stages of dementia. So I invited Lucy and David to meet, and we spent a day on her rooftop talking, and out of that, this made-up story that's rooted very much in truths in both of our lives came into being.
Yeah, I mean, your original question was like, why did you write this story, I guess? And yeah, I mean, I didn't even know about Laura's father, but I personally, I think when I brought the idea to you originally, I mean, I was sort of, I was a caregiver for my wife who had cancer. She was in her final years. And so I was sort of in that world of caregiving, which is just a bizarre universe of dutifulness and action. Like I have to do this, and this, and yet I have to do these things, or otherwise I'm gonna fall apart. And so the stress of being a caregiver was the drama of that was fascinating to me. You know, it was painful, but it was also like, okay, this is a unique psychic situation. So I think that was, yeah, the sort of the non-heroic side of being a caregiver. This opera is not necessarily about that, but there's a color in it of the son who's caregiving for his mother. Yeah, and as I said, Laura had her own.
Yeah, my dad had dementia, and he found his greatest joy in singing in a chorus for people with memory problems. And it was an extraordinary thing to see somebody who would be very often withdrawn or angry. And he always knew who we all were, and he always followed the politics of the day. So it wasn't that type of dementia, but he would have disassociation from reality and a lot of anger, and then a huge amount of fear. But he went to this weekly chorus, and he would sit up straight in his wheelchair, and he knew every lyric of every song from the American Songbook. And he was filled with joy, and it gave him the energy to keep going, and it gave him a lot of peace. So that became a piece of this fabricated story that we ultimately built. There are 4 characters in this opera, and it is an ensemble piece. So while it is centered on Lily, this elderly woman, all the other three characters are equally relevant, and their stories about their connection and engagement with her and their worlds and their histories and their emotional journeys is equally powerful, which was a wonderful thing to be developing with David.
Thank you both for sharing your personal stories. And it's interesting to see how much, and also you were a psychology major, right? And turned to music later. And Dr. Klugman in the opera did the sort of opposite of that. She was a musician who went into medicine and neurology, or right?
Yeah.
So amazing. Music therapy, you spoke about your dad being in chorus in those years, plays a central thematic role in the storyline as well. Did either of you have any additional connections to music therapy when you were writing this? What type of research did you do when you were trying to undertake this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to some music therapists. It's sort of odd, like in a different connection. There was a play on Broadway a few years ago called Farinelli and the King, which was about a countertenor orchestrato, actually, who sang for a King Philip something in Spain, who was experiencing some mental anguish in the 1700s, I think, and it helped him. The castrato singing for him in his chamber helped him. And so I wrote a little article about that, and I interviewed someone named Concetta Tamino, who's the head of an Institute for Music Therapy Research, who worked years ago with Oliver Sacks, and so she's deeply invested in the whole world of music therapy and the possibilities. So yeah, I mean, I would say the research that I did for this was both fascinating in terms of the science. This is a sidebar, but there's a line, I don't think I'm giving anything away, but there's a line in the opera called "There's a place in the brain where music lives." And I'm just waiting for a neurologist to be like, actually, there's several places in the brain. It's not just one.
We did that talk last week in Tachytron.
Well, actually, I mean, I think that is the point of why music is so powerful, is that, and in terms of our research, we've also, Dr. Tamino was great, and we did a public conversation with her like this. We did one a few weeks ago, month ago, I don't know, with Renee Fleming and a neuroscientist who specializes in brain injury. But I'm reading a book, I'm just about done, called I Heard There Was a Secret Chord by Daniel Levitin, who had written This Is Your Brain on Music about 15 years ago. And what you just said is actually, there isn't a place in the brain. The thing about music, and probably the thing that is why it is so powerful for people suffering from any kind of brain injury or dementia, is that music engages more synaptic activity than any other human endeavor. So it makes sense that if you're struggling with any kind of mental decline, that music, which touches so many different parts of your brain, can activate and spark different connections, and so it does have that ability to keep the brain healthy.
But as a librettist, you're like, how do I come up with the most evocative, poetic phrase that isn't too finicky? And there's a lot of metaphors in the piece, which I feel like music as memory, music as a bridge to the past, dementia as a possible journey into darkness. I mean, all life is a journey into darkness, but I mean, so the light and dark bridges. There's a lot of, it's a lot of rich poetic territory, and I just dove in because life's too short not to, and it was just for interesting poetic language, in my opinion.
Do you have a question, or should we just keep talking?
Keep talking.
I told you.
Lots of questions.
I told you that if you asked 2 questions, we probably wouldn't need it. We know what happens because it's great talk. No, go ahead. Ask your next question.
Say what you want to say, Laura.
I was just going to say that one of the things, and you know what? Ask your question because I lost my train of thought. How's that?
I had a question that wasn't on the paper, and now you made me lose my train of thought.
We need some music now.
I was going to say that last week we had a talk with this CEO of at the Allen Institute for Brain Science, Dr. Rui Costa, and the head of music therapy at Seattle Pacific University, and a few others. And it's really interesting. I'm not a scientist, so, but it's really interesting the sort of progress that they've made, even in the last year or two, on specifically where dementia in the brain starts and things like that. And the Allen Institute shares their research with all research institutes. So I'll digress because everyone wants to hear you speak and not me. But Lucy Shelton has a special connection to this story as well. In many ways, her character has a lot of parallels with her personal experience as an audience. Could you tell us more about that? There aren't a lot of, you said that you wrote this for Lucy, who will make her Met debut at the age of 80.
82.
82. Thank you for that. There aren't a lot of operatic roles written for older singers. How do you adapt the vocal line to showcase Lucy and her abilities as a singer?
So that's a great question. Now I remember what I forgot I was going to say. It's all related. That one of the things about my history with Lucy is I knew her when I was a student, and I had like an artistic crush on her. Like, this was a great artist who did compelling contemporary music, and she was spontaneous and fearless and just so diverse in what she did, and a beautiful voice. And we became friendly, partially because we both like to play Scrabble, and we used to meet to play Scrabble together. But one of the things I remembered about her was that she had done a beautiful recording of Schubert's song for soprano, clarinet, and piano, The Shepherd on the Rock, because I knew both the clarinetist and the pianist that she had recorded this with. And it became a metaphor, that's where I was heading, for a lot of David's more poetic construction of the libretto. And so I thought it would be an amazing thing when we got this commission and we knew there was a sort of limited size of ensemble, both musicians and singers, to use that piece and have the clarinet featured almost like a soloist, another singer, but without words, in the production. And so that helped shape the rest of the characters, because one of the four is obviously Lucy, who plays Lily, and then there's her son Dante, the primary caregiver, and then there's Dr. Klugman, who's me in reverse, who's the neuroscientist who had been a student of Lily's and given up her career in music, and then there's Sonny, the young clarinetist who, as a side gig, plays music for Dr. Klugman's patients. And so the idea of weaving this piece into the fabric of the opera became a constructive principle for us, but it became a kind of a personal gift back to Lucy in a way. So there's like many layers of connectivity around all that. I'm not sure I answered your question.
No,
oh, okay.
We just love hearing you speak, so that's fine. Many folks, probably, how many of you saw As One in the audience when we did it back in 2016? So yes, many folks probably remember seeing it, and little did we know that you would go on to be one of the most frequently, it would go on to be one of the most frequently produced American operas today. It tells the story of a person undergoing a gender transition, for those who may not know. It seems that you have a passion for telling stories about relevant contemporary topics. Could you tell us what interests you in telling such stories?
Sure, and I just realized the other piece of what I didn't answer about your last question, which we'll weave into As One, is that Lucy is 80 now, and we began talking about this, David and me, with her about 4.5 years ago. So she was a baby then. But for most women in opera, their careers are over. There are not that many roles for them once they hit, menopause age. And here's somebody who's twice that age, and there's nothing for them to do. And so a little part of me is just rebellious about the constraints and the standards of the opera business. So it's like, wait a second, we can make great roles for older singers who don't have any roles to sing. And and they may not have all of the same vocal facility. Like, we're not as, agile because our muscles get a little weaker or our joints get a little stiffer, but they have a lifetime of artistry and human experience. And it's so interesting to me that in the jazz world, we have these beautiful older jazz singers who've lost a lot of their technical facility, which Lucy has not. She has not, and I can talk about that as well, but they've lost some of their technical vocal production facility, but their life experience gives such profundity to their performances and their interpretations of lyrics and storytelling that we accept it, and we don't accept it in this field. So the idea that I would write this piece that maybe can give, beyond Lucy, if it goes on, so many other older women an opportunity to continue to share their art is great. Just as One took the idea of a transgender individual and it was sung by two separate singers, a baritone and a mezzo voice, who played the one character. And we've now had multiple trans singers playing both roles. And it's just like, we've got to stop making these rules that exclude people, because everybody wants to sing and tell stories.
I would say that,
Sorry, I've been talking a lot.
No, you're the composer. You have to do more work. The ethos of the piece is really, it's really against, hard rules. There's a lot of cliches and misapprehensions about the opera world, and so I'm gonna promulgate one right now. But no, it's just that the perfection is the goal, or the perfect tone, the perfect note, hitting that high note, being perfect. And I think that this piece embraces fragility, frailty, and Laura has written an astonishing range of. It's not just a sung-through opera, where everyone sounds pretty. There's Sprechstimme, which I'm sure people in the room know. I first got to know Lucy doing Pierrot Lunaire, the Schoenberg piece. Am I playing the Schoenberg?
Yeah, I think she has done it more than any other American soprano in the last 40 years.
I was dating a clarinetist who played in a chamber group that she performed with, so that's my connection. So there's Sprechstimme, there's spoken bits in the opera, there's pure song. It's like a range and it's like the range of human experience. So to me, it's a very theatrical piece, and I'm quite proud of it in that way.
And also, I think that one of the things that was so wonderful about working with David as we were developing it, we knew who these characters were, and we had to then place them in a world, and then we had to figure out how to move them around in the world. But the clarinet and the piano, and in this production here, we're only using clarinet and piano, but in the New York premiere, which was just a week ago tonight, there was actually strings and percussion as well. But the point is that Sonny is a clarinetist, so the clarinet is a double. And Dante, Lily's son, was her accompanist and a pianist who gave up his career to take care of her and also couldn't handle the horrors of the music business. So there's another little challenge that we put out there. So the pianist in this production is also part of the staging. They're not just supplying the musical landscape. They become doubles.
They're kind of like they're doubles. They're ghosts in some ways of the characters. And I was just thinking, like, as one, I was trying to think of the connections between as one and this piece, and it's kind of like, I don't know, both pieces are about like the self and finding the self, or trying to recapture the self maybe, and having a double, because in as one you have this person is split into two, and they have to find
that they're one.
Union, one.
David, I love how the four characters sort of, their narratives interconnect. And with each new scene, there's a new hidden layer to each of them that's revealed. How did you come up with such an inventive plot structure?
I mean,
He's a genius.
No, it was a challenge. It was a real challenge because I don't just like say, okay, Laura, this is the story. Here we're going. We had lots of meetings about the story, who these people are, how they're. We had different. There was earlier versions of the story that had to do with Lily's career as a composer, and betrayal by a conductor. Anyway,
Right. We had a bigger cast and a bigger backstory.
But,
it's like not necessary.
Yeah, but I mean, so the story that we arrived at is very interesting because, I've said this a few times, but it's like we're not doing an opera where people are trying to kill each other or sleep with each other. They're actually all decent people. Or am I wrong about that?
No. You're absolutely right.
But so I mean, it's all like decent people trying to help each other, but they all have their own baggage and their own problems, and by intention, they all have sort of issues in their lives that kind of like puzzle pieces connect to other people. So they're all kind of like reflecting off each other, and somebody said, like Laura might say something about her family that suddenly like hits me, So it's that kind of real life empathy resonance between characters. While also the what am I trying to say? The big elephant in the room, of course, is Lily's condition, and is she going to benefit from the music therapy? And Sunny, who's young and got her whole life ahead of her, has a tremendous problems with her family because of a decision she made a year ago having to do with a pregnancy. So there's a lot of drama, but it's not like people are like, fighting with each other, physically fighting on stage.
I mean, in a way, the struggles in the piece are all kind of core existential struggles. And in the end, we don't have incest, rape, murder, or catastrophic illness played out. We know that Lily's not going to get better. But that's the pain of it. It's not that we're watching her writhing. It's we're watching her awareness that she's beginning to lose herself. And that's the tragedy of it. But there's just, I just have to say, the lines in this piece that just, every time I think about them, they just go right to my heart, is in Sunny's aria, she sings, "Life is precious, what is given to you, what you choose, what you cannot choose." And in a way, that's what the piece is about. These four people who intersect and interact on all these different levels with their different hopes and aspirations and obligations and thwarted dreams and unfulfilled hopes and joy. And it's kind of like real life, but it's poetic because of the way you frame the story.
And it's set to gorgeous music, so we don't all get that, in life.
You all are talking about the humanity of the story, and this, I think, Alzheimer's and dementia is something that touches almost everyone in some way, within 1 or 2 or 3 degrees. How did you navigate creating something that is so close to so many people?
How did we? I mean, just by trying to be respectful, but not exploitative, not trying to, I know what it is to care for somebody who's lost control of their body and their mind, and and as well. Laura was talking about how, in essence, during the pandemic, you became a caregiver to your mother at your apartment. I don't know how to answer that, except it's like we could have done a version of this that was very graphic and very forensic, and I don't know, there's pain in this opera, but really wallowing in the pain. But we never really thought of going there. We're not trying to sanitize the experience, but we're also not trying to wallow in the misery of it.
I think one of the amazing things I think about you two choosing to create this piece is that it's something that everyone is affected by, but no one ever talks about. No one ever really publicly talks about, and many people who are suffering with dementia or Alzheimer's or memory loss are sort of hidden away and aren't out in public. And so we just, one of our singers went to perform at a memory care center just on a few days ago. And there's about 100 of them living in that community. So I applaud you both for taking something so difficult and bringing it to the masses.
In the rehearsal process in New York, at the very first day, we met. We knew, but we met officially the entire cast, the cover cast, and all the technical staff that were working on the piece, and everybody said something about who they were and why they were, participating in the project. And almost every single person had some very true and present situation in their lives with dementia. One member of the company had just put their mother into an assisted living for people with memory loss. Another one had just buried somebody. Another one was negotiating with their family about what to do with a member of their family. So it was very powerful to realize this is universal, and everybody's entry into this is different, but there's sameness for all of us, and we all held that very carefully as we went through the process of discovering the piece and giving it its most true expression for you guys tonight.
Yeah, opera, the mad scene is like a big thing in opera, of course, and it's sort of like this, opera exists for extremities, I guess, partly, and so I think I hope that we're, even though we're not I think we're not exploiting the issue for luridness, but I at the same time, I do hope that it hits hard just because of the understatedness of it,
Well, I think there's the traditional opera tropes of, the murder, the incest, the insanity, all of that, but there's a different kind of powerful storytelling that is what speaks to me, which is what we came together about, which is very intimate and very vulnerable. And it's, to me, often the quietest moment, maybe the most powerful moment. And in fact, in some ways, there's a few big arias and a few big fights and, a lot of stuff going on in this piece, but there's a very quiet duet for just Dr. Klugman singing with Lily that has almost nothing in it, that is, in my mind, incredibly powerful because it's so naked. It's so exposed. And so there's different ways to convey big emotions, and sometimes you can be very quiet.
The opera is about much more than dementia also. Another timely subject that it addresses is race and gender barriers in classical music. What inspired you both to sort of weave these threads into the narrative? I'll start with that question.
Well, I'm adopted, but there's no racial difference in the adopted family that I have back in New Hampshire. But we wanted to have a character who, I guess we thought Dante's adopted, and I guess we just wanted to have a character who had a different perspective on the music world than Lily's. And it's interesting because I don't know if I'm the person to talk about this, but it's like, I think people of color are having more opportunities in the classical music world, perhaps. They might disagree or something, but I think Dante, who's in his 40s, experienced barriers when he was trying to come up as a pianist, and so he gave it up a few years ago. And I think his experience is different from somebody in their 20s, perhaps, right now. So that's how we imagined him. And also, I'm just fascinated by adoption as a kind of as an existential problem in families. Whether there is a racial difference or not. I have bonding issues with my family, and every biological children have problems with their families. It's not like a unique thing, but
people have problems with their families.
Yes,
it's called the universal.
But adoption's a reality for me. But it's also an interesting device. To be perfectly honest, an interesting device to use in an opera as well.
But to be frank about it, when we decided that we wanted to try to create some diversity in the casting, there had to be a way to, what is it that there's an important dramaturg in this country, and her one line is, you've got to bake it into the score. Corey Ellison. You can't just put it on, like, we prefer that this person is 6'3" and, you know, has 3 eyes. You know, like, you can't do that. You have to make it part of what the storytelling is so that it's essential. And we felt that it would be important to give this piece a clarity that we're open to and supportive of creating more diversity in a field that has not had much of that. So we came up with this construct, which, because Dante was adopted and is of a different race and is in a profession that has not been sympathetic to that race, it added lots of layers of nuance into what his struggles were about. And he has to explore them. Well, did I give this up because it was too damn hard, because I'm black and they're not letting me in, or because my mom is famous and I'm following her on her coattails, or because she's sick? So he's got an existential crisis that touches on all of those things. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, that was part of the conversation, which doesn't mean in a future production that Lily, she could be black or Hispanic or Asian, or, you know, it doesn't matter. But we wanted to cement that there are some issues that are real, and so we made that decision.
I had never connected for me, but also going back to dementia Alzheimer's and how it affects everyone, it also doesn't affect a certain race or color, right? And so you putting a person of color in the show, you're also seeing them be affected, when many times in our lives we're insulated, we're in silos and aren't interacting with folks from other backgrounds. Sorry, I just had a...
Yeah, no.
Going back, because I skipped ahead, because that's where the conversation led us. As One was effectively a monodrama, whereas the 4 principal characters in Lucidity, as you said, it's an ensemble piece, carry equal weight. As a composer, what are the challenges of writing for 4 distinct characters, albeit ones that are stories are intertwined, but what are those challenges of writing for 4 characters?
Well, I mean, just as I think, and you should probably chime in, but for the writer of the words, the librettist, finding a unique way of expressing for each character is important. Otherwise, it's just generic sentences. So each character has their own way of talking and speaking. And so my job is to try to then musicalize that. So, you know, is somebody more nervous energy in how they, you know, the same line of text can be set so many different ways. So I'm more of a visual composer than anything else. So after David delivered the libretto, and we worked back and forth, you gave it to me scene by scene, and we talked about it, I started to, we knew who we were casting. We knew 2 of the 4 right away, early on, because we knew that Lucy Shelton was going to play Lily, and we knew that Blythe Gessert was going to play Dr. Klugman, and that was at my request, because Blythe is someone I trust my opera life to, because she actually workshopped as One for me, and has now been in 5 of my 7 operas. So she knows all the things I do wrong and can save my butt. But she'll be completely, brutally honest with me, which helps me, I hope, get better. So I already knew them as human beings and as friends that I trust, but as artists, and what their strengths and weaknesses are, and where they soar, and what they can do naturally as actors. So that began to shape how I saw them physically on the stage, in the set, moving around and delivering their story. And then that leads me to hearing what their presentation of the text would be as it's sung, but also what works instrumentally for their music to support them. And so and then with Dante, and then again with Sonny, each of them have their sort of their own music, both how they sing and how it's supported in the soundscape that I've created. And then the added layer that made this all a little bit weirder was the themes from The Shepherd on the Rock, which is a prominent piece of, there's a whole part of a scene where they're singing from it. But it's manipulated and shifted throughout the piece. And here's a secret that I've only told a few people, and only the clarinetists in the audience will probably recognize it, but there's a lot of other important clarinet music that I've played with that is a through line structurally in the piece. I used to play clarinet. I was a terrible musician. I played Shepherd on the Rock. I played the piano part really badly, and I played the clarinet part really badly. And God forbid, I never sang. So this is a piece that I love. But for me, the soundscape that you create is the world that gives the backstory, the depth to these characters. Because as wonderful and as thoughtfully as David is, giving just enough bits of a human being's background so that they're fully dimensional characters, you can't tell the whole story unless you want to do, a 5-hour opera with everything that's happened on each of their journeys through life. So there's not a huge amount of backstory, but there's enough that they have fullness to them. So my job is to then create the musical world that makes, every time we hear Dante, that we know that's Dante, and we know that he's carrying these things with him. And every time Sunny walks into the room, there's this happening musically, because that's her energy and her psychological place in this drama. So that's kind of how I think about it.
She has to do so much work. It's like, I mean...
Yeah, but it's your fault. You wrote the story.
No, because it's like, sometimes you'll get asked, do you hear the music? Do you hear it? It's like, no, I don't hear the music. I'm like writing words on a page. I'm writing it's not a play, it's not poetry, it's not a screenplay. There's no rules for writing a libretto, but it's like, you do know it has to be fairly concise. It can't be too wordy. And so, yeah, you're not going to have we have a scene where Dante talks a lot about his past. He talks for a few minutes about his childhood and all that. But there's a lot of, details of Sunny's life or Lily's past that we don't go in there. We don't explain it.
But you give enough of these little, it's interesting, I was just going to say, these little spotlights. And the set design is very much about lights, points of light that reveal. And what you've done in the libretto is you give these points of light, these little ways in.
Little details. Yeah.
Little details, and you, as an imaginative audience, if you hear a phrase that gives a little spark of something that happened to one of these characters, we don't know the full story, but you'll fill it in because David chose a really good image or a really good, thing, activity or experience, and just says, that happened. And then you're all going to take that and make more backstory for yourself so that you believe that character. That's kind of the brilliance of a good libretto.
Yeah, but I'm still amazed at the alchemy of what Laura does, because it's like, I provided a few bones, but she's got some flesh and muscle and skin, and it's dancing, and I'm just amazed at that transformation.
But I'm just going to add to that, and then I'm sorry, I didn't see you, but one of the things that was so powerful in watching this piece come together, because it is so intimate, is that, as I said, I'm very visual, so when I'm setting a line, I'm actually seeing in my imagination what that singer is doing physically, like, are they looking up, or are they looking away? Are they looking directly in the eyes of the person they're singing to, or are they looking into their mind? And the same words with the same melody and the same underscoring actually will read differently based on how it's directed to those details of, do you turn your head to the side? Do you look down? And our director, Sarah Myers, was so amazingly precise. And I'm not sure that it was that easy in the beginning for the singers, because she was saying, no, I want you to look away for this much time, and then I want you to turn. And it was like, wait, I'm trying to just sing this damn thing. But in the end, what she was doing was finding the deeper truth of every single line, so that it wasn't just that these have these people have the most amazing voices and stage presence, but they become those characters because they're not just singing that high B, they're singing that high B to you in this moment of vulnerability or anger, this way, like that, not like that. And those details help shape how a piece is conveyed.
Like operatic realism.
Yeah. Yeah, which that's like, what's that called, an oxymoron?
David, you are a critic and a playwright. How did you come into the opera world?
I mean, I started writing for Opera News, the RIP, the magazine for the Met Opera. Yeah, it was just like mostly director profiles. I don't know. So I mean, I did a story article about Salome, and I got really excited about that opera. The short answer is that I saw an opera by David Lang called The Difficulty of Crossing a Field. It's kind of obscure, but it's an amazing opera. It has a libretto by Mac Wellman, who's a experimental playwright in New York. And I was just like, wow, evocative minimalist music, weird, surreal libretto. You know, sign me up. Even though my work is generally not surreal or experimental per se, but just, you know, and I'm, as a theater critic, I also love musicals, Broadway musicals when they're good, which is very rare. But I love Sondheim. I don't know. It's just So I think about 15 years ago, so I started bugging a friend of mine to let a composer friend to let me write some text for him, and I just love it. There's nothing quite like, you know, hearing the words take off in music.
Before we open up for questions, we'll open up for questions to you guys shortly, so think of what you'd like to ask. Laura, you've written several chamber operas at this point. What attracts you to writing for smaller musical forces? And what role do you think chamber operas have to play in the contemporary opera industry?
I actually I've written 2 larger opera. I mean, I don't know when it stops being chamber and when it starts being
Who knows?
bigger.
I don't know.
But I think that most of my life I've been a composer of chamber music, instrumental chamber music. And so the level of intimate connection among the players and the conversation that has to happen, to me, is very exciting and vulnerable and powerful. And so when I started writing as one, it was for 2 singers singing one story and a string quartet, which is about the most intertwined and intimate combination because they are one voice. And so I love that intimacy and that connection. I mean, in fact, this piece takes this to an extreme because the orchestra is actually on the stage, not just playing where you see them playing, but integrated into the physical movement of the storytelling. There's something that is hierarchical about big orchestral music with the individual players don't really get to say a lot. They just have to be attentive and do it in time, in tune, and not individually expressive. And chamber music is a big conversation. So being able to do a big conversation with singers telling a story, with instrumentalists who are part of making that story, is very exciting.
And the second part of that question was, do you think that there's a role for chamber operas in the future of the opera as an art form? And what is that role? Either of you.
What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I dream of grand opera. What's the story that deserves a grand opera? I mean, it's a puzzle because it's hard to answer that because I mean it's a question of music, like what kind of music are we going to fill a 2,000 or 3,000 seat opera house? You know, it's like there's something so big and stupid about the idea of grand opera.
Well, it's the most intimate stories, right? You're sitting there arguing with your significant other, and you're about to murder them, and right. We're in a house full of 3,000 people.
Right. How do you do intimate human stories with maybe with maybe national resonance, or not, but or how do you make them resonate big enough that they can? I mean, and what kind of music do we write? Do we write like big fat neo-romantic music, or do we write movie music? There's a lot of aesthetic questions and a lot of that I don't have the answer to.
Existential questions.
I'm just going to venture to say that there is an economic reality to maintain grand operas because there are these big facilities and people who have contracts, and it's a big thing to move around, and it still has a relevance, and there's a great historic repertoire that people love, and there are some new grand operas that people love, and that should all continue to thrive. But I have what you were just saying about two people in the kitchen having an argument, somebody's going to kill somebody because they're so upset, doesn't belong over there and for your 4,000 people watching it at a distance. It's like it is absurd. But I think the reason that chamber opera is having such a blossoming right now is that we have lived now for at least a generation very isolated from each other, where everything is available in a little handheld device and we're not sharing. And that opportunity to be in the room where you hear people breathing with you, watching those people singing in front of you, and you see the spit come out of their mouth, and you hear their footsteps on the stage, and you're with it viscerally, that brings us together. That's really human, and it's needed. And I think that doing it on that more intimate scale in this kind of fragmented, lonely world that we're living in is very powerful.
And I just want to say one quick thing by way of compromise between like the 3,000 and the 100-seat theater is that I go to Broadway all the time. There's so much opera that I want to see in a Broadway house, not at the Met. God bless the Met, but it's like, so I mean, I want to see opera in a 500-seat theater or a 600-seat theater. That's an interesting scale that I would love to explore.
Yeah, agreed. We need more of those size spaces.
Mid-size, yeah.
What do you want audience to leave with after they see Lucidity? And you don't have to answer that.
Like Laura said, the preciousness of life, the delicacy of it, hope. Yeah, I mean, just it's not a happy ending, but it's also not a grisly tragedy either. It's just it's life. It's how life happens, and if you're lucky, you'll make beautiful connections with people, and you'll find forgiveness and reconciliation, and you'll have a moment of clarity if you're lucky. It's like if you find love in your life, you've been lucky.
I agree with the librettist.
He's good with his words.
Absolutely.
We will open up to you all. Does anyone have a question? Right in the back there, in the back row.
Great, and I've got a mic here.
You sparked me when you were talking about the themes of your different characters, and I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about how the different leitmotifs came to you for these characters and what we could look for in this production.
I mean, it's I have to think about this carefully because this is a different orchestration than the one in New York, so I had to...
Which you did a week ago.
So I have to be clear, but the little fragments of Schubert are both part of Lily's past and part of everybody's searching journey, and you'll recognize them once you hear them. There is a kind of keep shifting motive that is in the clarinet that's a little bit angular, and it's not specified, like I didn't map it out with David clearly, but it's like, because Lily had a career as a singer and a teacher, but she was a closet composer who never could get recognized as a composer because there weren't opportunities for women. Similarly to our issues for being a black pianist, the reality is women, until really recently and even still, are disproportionately disadvantaged in the field. So there's this more modernist, edgy music that keeps coming through, and it's both about psychological discomfort, but it's implied that maybe it's Lily's music. And there is this piece that's an important theme throughout the piece, through our piece, called Chosen Son, which is her song cycle. And it's very spare, as I said earlier. There's very little going on, but it's very open and honest, but there's a tiny bit of accompaniment in that comes out of all of that swirling clarinet music that's more complicated. So those are some things to listen to. There's also, and we don't have percussion here, so the pianist is doing some amazing things to create some of the sound world we wanted, but there is a kind of pulsing, and that's about the passage of time and the sort of frozenness of time, and also the moving forward and the waiting that you'll hear. And that goes a little bit, belongs with Dante, because his life has been put on hold, and he's also doing all the chores, as David was saying. His life is very measured, taking care of Lily. So you'll hear repeating pitches or bangs, knocks. So those are some of the things. I'm sure I'm missing a lot that I'm going to feel really dumb afterwards.
The Claire, their eyes.
Oh, that big. There's one, when Dr. Klugman, who's having a writer's block and can't finish her book about the connection between music and memory, she remembers having studied with Lily when she had been a music student, and she somehow knows that there's some way that reconnection for her is going to help her finish her book. Like, it's not clear. I don't want to give away the whole story, but she sings this one line that's, you'll hear it. It's sort of, she's standing alone, Dr. K, and she's spotlit, and she goes, your eyes, the beauty of your voice, and it's just floating, and that keeps getting transformed not just as a vocal line, but as a musical line. So there's these motifs that keep coming back that you'll hear that mark time. There's some edgy music that's always about motion and getting to the next thing that keeps getting reimagined. So I hope that helps. I mean, I could show you a score, but that made me nervous answering that one.
A question for both of you. I just wanted to know what surprised you in the process of making this, or what did you learn?
Trust the unconscious. I don't know. The stuff that, I mean, you put a certain amount of yourself into every role, every line, every word, but then if you're lucky, you'll get back. It's like, you put a coin in the slot machine, you get back more. So I guess I should know this by now, but being in the room with the actors, the designers, the director, and Laura and us, it just always amazes me how the more brains in the room, the richer the piece gets, because everybody's contributing to it. So it just gets bigger.
And there is something that is unconscious or subconscious in how we all enter into it. So there was one review in New York that talked about, there's a line that Lily sings when she has a moment of clarity after hearing Shepherd on the Rock that reminds her of her senior recital, her glorious moment that launched her career. And she talks about how she performed her recital wearing her brother's denim overalls. And none of us caught it. The critic caught it. In the next scene, when Sunny comes in to do music therapy, she's wearing denim overalls. So the designer, the costume designer, subtly, and it wasn't even obvious denim overalls. They're very chic. They're not like workers' overalls. So nobody thought about it, and we don't know. I've never asked the designer, was that a conscious thing or was that a subconscious thing? But all these layers of connection that we all were making, we realized that there were more levels of dyads, like two people connecting in every which way. So all the different, what's the word, vortexes? Is that the right word? No, that's not the right word. Matrix. Like all of the different connectivity, Bob would probably know the science word. It is. Okay, thank you. That there are more layers than we even consciously knew when we were putting it together that different people were picking up on. So that was a big surprise.
I think there's a question along the back wall there.
And sadly, this will have to be the last question for this evening.
Alex is cutting me off.
Not sad for me, at least. I am the last. So, though, is this a way of keeping baby boomers relevant as well? I mean, because, could this opera have been written 20 years ago and people would go to it? Is it yet again an impact that we are making on this art form? Because you're talking about something that I don't think most of us are hoping to get. I don't think it's anything we hope anybody we love gets. And I dare say we don't even want our neighbors to get Alzheimer's. And yet it is something, a part of the life and the end of one's life that there is. So are you giving more hope to people who are aging that they may be able to be in an opera like this as well and come to see one too?
That's a really interesting question. I mean, Dennis said something earlier that kind of relates to this. It's like people don't talk about it. People don't want to say they've been diagnosed or they're grappling with it, and there is the genetic component, so you're afraid, like, oh, my uncle has it, does that mean I'm going to have it? We don't talk about it, and I think that a piece like this, if it is successful and it reaches lots of audiences, gives people a place to talk about it a little bit at a distance, but to then be vulnerable and open. Just as when we opened as one in 2014, people were not comfortable talking about being transgender. And in fact, the word cisgender had just become part of the lexicon, and we didn't know what it meant. Think about where we are 10 years later. So if this piece is a little part of maybe making it easier to acknowledge that this is here, and it's real, and it affects most people on some level, even at a distance, maybe it will be helpful in, enabling conversation and emotional openness around it.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you, David. Let's give them a round of applause.